So, Wheels Within Wheels, the long con of Zhao Gao. But first, a bit of background. Zhao Gao was a court eunuch in the Qin Empire, which held power over much of modern China between 221 BC and 207, 206, depends if you're a de facto or de jure cat. Despite its short run, it is perhaps the most impactful of all Chinese dynasties. It ended a centuries-long period of de facto disunity, there's de facto, and dissolution through aggressive and cruel military conquest. Under its first emperor, Qin Shi Huangdi, literally first emperor of Qin, all aspects of society were stringently unified for the very first time in the region's history. One writing system, one set of weights and measures, one currency, one philosophy of government and rule, and most importantly, one ruler over all, the emperor himself in all his glory. It also led to some of the most iconic symbols in China to this very day, like the terracotta warriors, and what eventually became the Great Wall. One might assume that a dynasty that only lasts this long is like a candle that burns brightest and therefore shortest, that it must have just exhausted itself. In fact, the culprit for its short reign is Zhao Gao. The cruel and authoritarian first emperor died suddenly while on tour of his eastern territories. With him were his Chancellor Li Si, his most senior advisor and the architect of the Standardization Unification Project, Hu Hai, the emperor's simple youngest son, and Zhao Gao, the young prince's tutor. In the wake of the monarch's death, two things were readily apparent. One, mercury, it turned out, is not an immortality cure. And two, Hu Hai's eldest brother, Fu Su, despite his recent spats with his father, would be emperor as soon as the news of his father's death was announced. This was very bad for Li Si and Zhao Gao. Fu Su had been sent to the Northern Front for a bit of a timeout because of his criticism of his father's cruel implementation of Li Si's unification project. So Li Si's chances of maintaining his chancellorship in a new administration were pretty much shot. Zhao Gao's problems were even more immediate. Meng Tian, the engineer in general who devised the earthworks that would one day become the Great Wall, was a supporter of Fu Su and would likely climb the imperial ranks with him. On top of that, Meng Yi, Meng Tian's little brother, had previously sought the death of poor little Zhao Gao, or sought the death penalty for Zhao Gao. That's a lot of fucking names, but in short, Li Si and Zhao Gao were both royally, no pun intended, fucked when Fu Su took the throne. And then, we are left to assume, one of them looked at the other and said, if. Yeah.
Shifty.
Oh yeah, that's where we're at. The treacherous triumvirate concealed Qin Shi Huangdi's death for months while they returned to the capital far in the west. They kept him concealed behind a shade, changed his clothes daily, pretended to be sent out as his messengers, and even had carts of rotten fish pulled alongside to hide the stench of the, totally not dead emperor. Secondly, the three conspirators forged a letter in Qin Shi Huangdi's name instructing Fu Su and Meng Tian to commit suicide. A lot more people got to die. Let's go. Qin Shi Huangdi's administration, because of his preference for legalist philosophy, made an environment of complete submission towards the sovereign. So Fu Su and Meng Tian had pretty much no recourse once they saw the will. Fu Su committed suicide as per his not-father's wishes, and Meng Tian defied the order, which gave Zhao Gao the pretense he needed to arrest him and also the rest of his family, including his brother Meng Yi, which in short order led to their suicide/executions. Pretty sick. His first plot in the bag, Zhao Gao said about the next one. Made prime minister for his part in the previous plot, Zhao used his authority to sequester the new emperor, the artist formerly known as Prince Hu Hai, hereafter referred to as Qin Shi. His regnal name, literally second generation of Qin, yada. As the son of heaven, Zhao Gao told the new emperor it was only just and right that the emperor remain distant from his court, maintaining his purity and divinity. Zhao Gao would humbly serve as his intermediary, and who would know better, the tutor or the student? In short time, Zhao Gao had created an alternate reality for the emperor, one in which members of his court and even many of his brothers and sisters were disloyal elements seeking to undermine him. And what do we do with traitors? Yeah, it's like science. Technically, this next bit of info happens chronologically after the next slide, but Zhao Gao was a master of plots, not plotting. In one famous incident, Gao had a deer brought in before the emperor in front of the members of his court. Gao, instead of calling it a deer, called it a horse, to the confusion of the emperor, who knew the animal to be a deer. He's no idiot. And for reference, we have some city folk in the audience. But after the emperor said that it was, in fact, a deer, Zhao watched as each member of the court in turn gave their own opinions. Those that said that the animal was in fact a deer were systematically brought up on trumped-up charges and executed. Soon the court was entirely under Zhao Gao's control.
Gross.
Wow.
Shifty.
Yeah. So, ignore them. Between the extant supporters of the late Fu Su and the many new citizens of the empire chafing under the Qin's harsh authoritarianism, discontent was suddenly rampant.
No.
The second emperor's inattentiveness and Zhao Gao's focus on courtly power grabs allowed it to spread without check. Within a year of Qin Shi Huangdi's death and Qin Ershi's ascension, the Dazaxiang rebellion had broken out. Though it failed, without a coordinated response from the central government, others quickly followed. Li Si, in an attempt to wrest control of the emperor back from Zhao Gao, informed him of the rebels' victories and the need to take drastic measures to combat them. But Zhao Gao had been feeding the emperor information that the rebels were being... But Zhao Gao had been feeding the emperor information that the rebels were being driven back, and those that spoke to the contrary had ulterior motives. You done been outfoxed, kid. For his now obvious treason, Li Si was ordered to receive the 5 punishments, an ancient method of torture and execution Li Si himself had helped revive. So at least it's ironic.
Irony.
Whereby the victim had removed, in order, their nose, a hand, a foot, their genitals, and finally the bottom half of their body. Emotional support, cuteness, courtesy of my cat. His Instagram handle. You gotta get yours. But Li Si's death could not change the military situation. A decisive defeat in the field against the rebels had left the bulk of the Qin military stranded in what was now enemy territory, and in dire need of reinforcements if they were going to survive. When now Chancellor Zhao Gao received the news, he made sure that Qin Ershi did not trust the messenger, telling him that it was a rebel ruse to draw out and ambush the capital's remaining defenders.
Shifty.
Qin Ershi denied the request and ordered the Qin commander to return to the capital for punishment, which for the Qin dynasty, as you can tell by now, is fucking execution. The commander, not taking that option, instead decided to surrender to the rebels. But unfortunately, his army, around 200,000 strong, was many times larger than the limited logistics of the rebels could take on as prisoners. So instead they were buried alive. When undeniable evidence of the empire's sorry state finally reached Qin Ershi, he flew into a rage and ordered Zhao Gao's execution. But, he came to find, the court was now stuffed with people who only saw horses and never deer. Surrounded by an entire court devoted solely to his eunuch, 24-year-old Qin Ershi was forced to commit suicide only 3 years into his reign. So, Zhao Gao then raised Prince Ziying onto the throne, who, although he is reported to have been, genealogy, yada yada, parentage unknown, but he was the new emperor. Well, he was going to be. Except that the day he was to receive his throne, Zhu Ying called in sick. Zhao Gao rushed to Zhu Ying's home to bring him to the coronation, only to find that this was a ruse to lure him into an ambush, as Zhu Ying and his 2 sons cut the eunuch down. But even with Zhao Gao gone, Zhu Ying was left with only a shell of an empire, an inept and corrupt court, a populace in total rebellion, and little military force to speak of. The writing was on the friggin' wall. Within a year, he surrendered, and he and his entire family were entirely wiped out. And for all its significance, the Qin dynasty fell, eventually replaced by one of those rebels who founded the Han dynasty, kicking off what is now seen as the foundational golden age of Chinese history. The writing, Han characters. Legalism, out of here. Confucianism, son. And the ethnicity of the people who occupied that area, first unified by Qin Shi Huangdi, Han Chinese. So, not a very good plot, right? It seems like that didn't work. Everybody's dead, especially you. There is, in fact, another theory. And to go into it, this is actually, I think, the dominant theory, but you call up a sinologist and he's like, how did you get this number? So, to explain, we have to go back to the very beginning, before the Qin dynasty was even founded. Pictured here are the conquests of the Qin state, the eventual Qin empire. But what is that there? Enhance. Enhance. You see, Zhao Gao was from the state of Zhao, conquered decades previously by Qin Shi Huangdi, and there is evidence to suggest that he was, though distantly, of the royal family. So because this is how the Qin got eunuchs, the forcibly castrated members of royal lines of defeated foes. So Zhao Gao was likely one of the few, if not the very last, survivors of a royal dynasty otherwise brutally wiped out, their people, written language, and culture consumed entirely by the imperialist and tyrannical Qin state. On top of that, there are some accounts that Meng Tian, the Great Wall asshole from earlier, was personally the one who raped and killed Zhao Gao's young wife. If true, young Zhao Gao's life is a tragedy so awful one wonders how someone could ever achieve solace, let alone closure. What would vengeance look like?
Shifty!
I mean, if you would have to embark on a decades-long quest to eliminate the entire imperial clan and every key member of government, destroy the army, and burn the whole fucking thing to the ground.
Shifty!
To all those that want to make John Wick look like motherfucking Teresa.
Yeah, Justin!
Stay here, Justin. Stay here.
This is your third Odd Salon. That means that we're now going to invite you to become an Odd Salon Fellow.
Hi. Hi.
Do you accept?
I do.
Which nobody can deny. Thank you.